January 17, 1945, southern tip of Okinawa. Dawn, the first light broke over the East China Sea, casting long shadows across the volcanic ridges of Kakozu. Lieutenant Takeshi Yamada stood in his reinforced bunker 40 feet below the surface, carved into limestone that had taken his men 3 months to hollow out. The air smelled of damp stone and gunpowder residue. Through the narrow firing slit, he watched the American landing craft spill their cargo onto the beaches, metal boxes on treads, the M4 Sherman tanks lumbering forward like industrial toys. He smiled. These were the machines that had failed so spectacularly at Tarawa. These were the coffins that burned on Peleliu. His men called them Ronsons, cigarette lighters that ignited with one strike. The Imperial Army had studied every report from Saipan, from Iwo Jima. They knew the Sherman's weaknesses by heart: thin armor on the flanks, a gasoline engine that turned the crew compartment into a furnace, a turret that could be penetrated by the Type 147 anti-tank gun at 400 meters. Yamada had 12 of those guns positioned in interlocking fields of fire. He had confidence, he had geology, he had time. What Lieutenant Yamada did not know, what no Japanese officer on Okinawa knew in those first cold days of 1945, was that the United States had already rewritten the rules of armored warfare. While Japanese intelligence officers pored over 2-year-old technical manuals, American factories had been working triple shifts in Detroit, in Gary, in Pittsburgh. The Sherman had evolved. The M4A3 what the crews called the Easy 8, had arrived in the Pacific with modifications that existed nowhere in Japanese tactical documents. A new horizontal volute spring suspension system gave it stability on slopes that would have immobilized earlier models. The 76mm high-velocity gun replaced the old 75mm, a weapon that could punch through 16 inches of reinforced concrete at 1,000 yards. But the transformation ran deeper than specifications. The engine was a Ford GAV-8, 450 horsepower, burning refined diesel instead of aviation gasoline. The transmission was torquematic. The Vision cupola gave the commander a 360-degree view. Every hatch had been redesigned based on reports from tank crews who had died because they couldn't escape fast enough. This was industrial democracy translated into steel, a machine designed by the men who would use it, built by a nation that treated its soldiers as investments rather than expenditures. On April 8, 1945, the illusion shattered at Kakozu Ridge. Yamada's anti-tank guns opened fire at dawn, targeting the lead Shermans as they climbed the southern approach. The first round struck home and ricocheted. The Japanese gunners adjusted, fired again. The shells sparked off the glacis plates like matches struck against stone. Then the American tanks returned fire. The 76mm gun spoke with a voice Yamada had never heard, a deep, concussive roar that shook dust from the bunker's ceiling. The first shell penetrated 20 feet of limestone and detonated inside the ammunition cache of gun position 3. The second shell collapsed the reinforced entrance to gun position 7, entombing the crew. Within 11 minutes, 9 of Yamada's 12 anti-tank guns were destroyed. The remaining crews abandoned their positions and fled into the tunnel network. The Shermans continued forward, grinding over obstacles that should have stopped them, firing high-explosive rounds into cave mouths with methodical precision. By nightfall, Kakozu Ridge, the position Japanese commanders had called impregnable, was in American hands. The soldiers of the 96th Infantry Division found Yamada's command post 3 days later, abandoned in haste. On the makeshift desk, they discovered his journal written in careful characters. The entries from January spoke of certainty, of technological superiority, of the spiritual strength that would compensate for industrial weakness. The entries from April were different. The American tanks do not burn, he had written on the 9th. Our guns cannot stop them. They move like living things. They do not retreat. The final entry, dated April 11, contained a single sentence. We have been fighting ghosts of machines that no longer exist. This cognitive dissonance would repeat itself across Okinawa through 82 days of combat. Japanese forces had prepared for an enemy that had already disappeared, replaced by something their doctrine could not accommodate. The M4A3s operated in combined arms teams, supported by flamethrower variants that could project jelly gasoline 200 feet into cave systems by bulldozer tanks that could seal bunkers under tons of earth in minutes. American logistics delivered spare parts to the front lines within hours. Damaged tanks were recovered, repaired, and returned to service, while Japanese armor, the few Type 97 Kiha tanks that remained, sat immobilized for lack of replacement treads. The abundance was almost incomprehensible. One captured Japanese report noted with bewilderment that American forces had dedicated tanks whose only purpose was to retrieve other damaged tanks. The concept of a vehicle built solely for salvage operations suggested a depth of industrial capacity that rendered conventional military calculations meaningless. But the true weapon was not the tank itself. It was the system that produced it. The assembly lines in Chrysler's Detroit arsenal, where workers welded hulls at a rate of 1 every 40 minutes. The training facilities at Fort Knox, where crews learned to operate as coordinated teams rather than individual warriors. The culture that valued mechanical reliability over symbolic purity. Japanese tanks were named for emperors and imbued with spiritual significance. American tanks were given girls' names and treated as tools. One was theater, the other was engineering. In the end, Lieutenant Yamada survived Okinawa. He surrendered on June 18, 1945, emerging from a collapsed tunnel near Mabuni with 47 men, the remnants of a battalion. In his post-war interrogation, an American intelligence officer asked him when he knew the battle was lost. Yamada's answer was translated into the official record: "When I saw that your tanks had headlights." He explained that no Japanese tank carried illumination systems. They were unnecessary weight and indulgent. The fact that American tanks carried lights, that they expected to fight at night, that they possessed the fuel to operate continuously in darkness, revealed an assumption of surplus that inverted everything he understood about war. The light itself was the message: we have so much we can afford to be seen.